failed rescue. Another American is killed by Islamic militants as commandos arrive to save him. Day in court. The Little Sisters of the Poor challenge the mandates in the Affordable Care Act. Spiritual journey. Wyatt Goolsby takes us on a walking tour highlighting today's Feast of the Immaculate Conception. And into the fields. Inmates learn new skills through a prison work program. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Monday, December 8th, 2014. Good evening from Washington. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. The Little Sisters of the Poor were in court in Denver today fighting the Health and Human Services birth control mandate. The religious order maintains the government is trying to force the sisters to violate their faith. Jason Calvi begins our coverage tonight. And what are the basics of the case, Jason?
Well, Brian, the Little Sisters of the Poor brought their fight to an appeals court in Denver today. It's the same appeals court that originally sided with Hobby Lobby in what would later become a historic Supreme Court case over religious freedom. The Little Sisters of the Poor are an international religious order that serves the elderly poor, including in 30 nursing homes across the United States. They were founded by a Catholic saint in France 175 years ago. As a nonprofit religious organization, they don't qualify for the HHS mandate exemption that's given to churches. The government says it's only asking the sisters to write an opt-out letter that states they object to birth control on religious grounds. It says the government will then notify the insurance companies that it needs to provide birth control coverage for the sisters' employees. But the sisters say writing that letter makes them complicit with immoral acts.
But the government forces us to either violate our conscience or take millions of dollars that we raise by begging for care of the elderly poor and instead pay fines to the IRS.
On the other hand, the government lawyer says writing a letter doesn't force the religious group to provide birth control. The government adds that the sisters won't have to contract, arrange, or pay for the coverage. The government lawyer said today in court that we disagree that the act of opting out constitutes a substantial burden on their religious beliefs. The Little Sisters are leading this class action lawsuit. If they win, it could be a big victory for the hundreds of Catholic groups that get their insurance through Christian Brothers Services. If they lose, it means big fines for the order. A decision is expected by spring. Brian?
Thank you, Jason. Christina Arriaga is Executive Director of the Beckett Fund, which represents the Little Sisters of the Poor and others, including EWTN. Let's look at this specific case, Kristen, and the repercussions of it.
Well, as you know, the government has been threatening the Little Sisters with millions of dollars in fines unless they provide their employees with contraceptives and abortion-causing drugs. The government has been threatening them for so long that the sisters had to go to the Supreme Court twice to get a preliminary injunction to get protection from these fines accruing. Now, the fines stop accruing until the case is heard in court. And that's what happened today, that the sisters' case, the merits, were heard in court before the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals.
Yeah, the sister pointed out that the income that the sisters get is donated. I know I make donations to the Little Sisters. I know many of our viewers do as well. Some of that would have to be paid into fines. Now, the government insists that women employed by the Little Sisters, and there are many in their homes, are denied contraceptive coverage. Is that a violation of their rights?
Oh, the government's claims are absolutely absurd. Let's look at the numbers. The government already exempted 96% of all employers in the United States from the employer mandate and from the HHS mandate. The government already spends $300 million in funding, taxpayer funding, to provide Title X and other federal funded programs with the money that they need to pay for contraceptives for women who go to a Title X place and they want them. The government has many other ways to give contraceptives to women that do not include involving nuns. We live in the largest country in the world, and we now have the largest insurance exchange in the world that can provide these drugs. The fact that they would force this little order of nuns to provide these services is just absurd.
And Christian Brothers Services actually provides the health benefits to the Little Sisters and others. How does this affect their ministry?
So what the government is trying to do is to tell the sisters to sign this form so the government can commandeer Christian Brothers into providing these drugs and services. And Christian Brothers has also said that they will not provide these drugs and services. Christian Brothers currently represent hundreds of ministries that provide services to hundreds of millions of Americans that need these services. They would also be affected by this ruling.
The Hobby Lobby case was huge in this area, but that is for profits. The Little Sisters and EWTN and others are nonprofits. Is there a connection between these cases?
Absolutely. The government has already lost 90% of its cases in court, including the Hobby Lobby case. The Supreme Court ruled that closely held corporations have rights to religious liberty. The fact that the government still insists Little Sisters of the Poor are not religious enough to merit an exemption has to be something that is in the mind of every single judge in that panel in the 10th Circuit.
This seems like a no-win for the government. What's at play here?
That's a very good question. I think that the government wants to make itself the only arbiter of morality in this country, and it's a big danger not only for the sisters, not only for nonprofits, but for all Americans that wish to live according to their deeply held convictions.
Well, they better know what they're dealing with. That Little Sisters, it's a little misleading. They're very powerful and an incredible congregation. Well, we appreciate you, Christina, and of course we should mention that the Beckett Fund also represents EWTN. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much, Brian.
And now some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. The White House says security has been beefed up at American embassies. This as a new report on interrogation methods is about to be released. The Senate Intelligence Committee is expected to release that report tomorrow. The report details CIA interrogation methods, which some view as torture, in the days following the 9/11 terrorist attacks. 6 detainees are in Uruguay tonight after being held by the U.S. for more than a decade at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. The 4 Syrians, a Tunisian and Palestinian, were detained in 2002, suspected of ties to al-Qaeda. They never were actually charged and were cleared for release in 2009. Until now, no country would take them and guarantee their security. Uruguay's president says his country accepts them as a humanitarian gesture. The U.S. now holds 67 men at Gitmo. They've been cleared of charges, but not yet released. 2 hostages, one an American photojournalist, are dead after a U.S.-led attempt to rescue them from al-Qaeda terrorists in Yemen. This was the second attempt in 2 weeks by U.S. Special Forces to rescue American Luke Summers. He and a South African teacher were shot dead when their captors discovered Navy SEALs preparing to raid the compound. President Obama authorized Saturday's mission after receiving intelligence that Summers' life was in imminent danger. We are now learning that South African Pierre Corky may have been on the verge of release, negotiated by his aid agency.
Negotiations have been through tribal leaders from June right up till the 26th of November, when the tribal leaders came back to us and said, we have secured the release for Pierre Corky and he will be released very soon.
Gift of Givers recently informed Corky's wife that the waiting is almost over. The U.S. ambassador in South Africa says the United States was unaware of these talks. Pope Francis tweets a video message to Iraqi Christians saying he wishes he could be with them in person. He says, I am very close to you during these difficult times. Christians in Iraq bear witness to Christ in spite of being persecuted and unwanted, and he knows the suffering there is in that witness. This was Pope Francis' first video message on Twitter. It was produced by CTV, the Vatican Television Center. Pope Francis says he is not worried about resistance to his reforms of the Roman Curia. Interviewed for the Argentine newspaper La Nación, he discussed a wide range of topics from Latin America to his own health. He gave specific attention to ongoing freedom of the Roman Curia, or ongoing reform, I should say. Pope Francis recognizes there is resistance, but he says that means different points of view, not something dirty. Those are his words. To understand what he thinks on issues, he says, don't believe the media. He says people should look at his statements, his homilies, and his encyclicals. Asked about Cardinal Raymond Burke's new position on the Order of Malta, Pope Francis says he, quote, needed a smart American for the job. And about Cardinal Burke's reaction to the Holy Father, he said he thanked me in very good terms and accepted my offer. I even think he liked it. It is therefore not true that I removed him because how he behaved at the Synod. 6 people are dead after a small jet crashes this morning in Washington, D.C., in a suburban neighborhood. The FAA says the plane was approaching a small airport in Gaithersburg, Maryland, when it crashed into homes. 3 people who died were on board the jet. The other 3 lived in the neighborhood where that plane went down. 2 homes appear to be nearly destroyed. Another two also caught fire, but were not badly damaged. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge make their first visit to New York City. The royal couple's itinerary includes a visit to the 9/11 Memorial Museum, as well as a basketball game. Duchess Kate spent today visiting a child development center in Harlem with Mayor Bill de Blasio's wife. Prince William met with President Obama here in Washington this morning. He stopped by the World Bank to speak about the harms of illegal wildlife trading and poaching. His remarks come ahead of a conservation event with the Clintons in New York.
The cumulative effect of wildlife crime is shocking. The abundance of the world species has decreased by almost a third over the last 100 years. This hugely impoverishes all of us.
The prince said illegal wildlife crimes hurt developing countries as well as the transportation industry. Coming up, Martin Luther King Jr.'s niece weighs in on civil rights in the U.S. after two controversial grand jury decisions. From the Twitter account of Pope Francis on this feast of the Immaculate Conception, let us learn from the Virgin Mary how to be bolder in obeying the Word of God. Welcome back to EWTN News Nightly for Monday, December the 8th. I'm Brian Patrick. Thanks for joining us. Pope Francis continues the tradition of honoring the solemnity of the Immaculate Conception in Rome's famous square, Piazza della Spagna. Standing before a statue of Mary adorned with flowers, the Pope spoke to a small crowd. The Vatican says Francis put his own stamp on the occasion, donating a statue of Our Lady with child to the Cathedral of St. John Lateran. The Immaculate Conception is the doctrine of Mary, born free from original sin, her soul already redeemed and full of grace. Franciscan friars here in Washington hope Catholics will reflect on the life of Mary this Advent season. The Franciscan monastery hosts a special tour today and on all Marian feast days. Wyatt Goolsby takes us there tonight.
Pilgrims here in Washington are marking today's solemnity by going on a spiritual journey. The Franciscan Monastery of the Holy Land in America started a new Marian tour this fall, highlighting the life and role of the Virgin Mary. Peter Hickman, the lay guide, designed the tour based on sites in the Holy Land.
There are so many of the replicas, while they deal directly with Christ because of the association of the Blessed Mother with our Lord, that it kind of a perfect mix.
From Our Lady of Lourdes to the Tomb of Mary to a shrine of the Immaculate Conception, the monastery has numerous references to the Blessed Mother, references Father Greg Friedman says are connected to the Franciscan tradition.
St. Francis had a great love for Our Lady. He mentions her in his prayers, in his writings, and Franciscan scholarship after the time of St. Francis developed the rationale, you might say, the reasons why the Immaculate Conception, the fact that Mary was conceived without sin, should become part of mainstream Catholic belief.
Father Greg believes it's that tradition of devotion to Our Lady that will be clear to anyone taking the tour. Here at the Franciscan Monastery, there are a lot of obvious references to Mary. There are statues, there are shrines, but there's a few subtle references as well. I'm walking in what's called the Rosary Portico. There are 10 columns in each section which correspond to each decade of the Rosary, which means if you were to walk around the entire facility, you could pray the entire Rosary. Father Greg says for people who cannot travel to the Holy Land, this provides a connection with the physical sites associated with the Holy Family.
It gives you a picture, it gives you an image, it gives you a hear, if you will, to connect with your spirituality, your belief, and your love for God.
And it's a deeper connection to Our Lady Franciscans hope pilgrims will take home this Advent. In Washington, Wyatt Goolsby, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Wyatt, for that tour. The Senate Republican majority has grown, with the last Southern Democrat losing a weekend re-election bid. Republican Representative Bill Cassidy easily defeated Democratic Senator Mary Landrieu of Louisiana in a runoff on Saturday. Cassidy's campaign successfully linked the three-term Landrieu to President Obama and his policies. Saturday's race leaves Democrats without a single governor, U.S. senator, or legislative majority across 9 southern states. Republicans now hold 54 seats when the Senate convenes in January. The Justice Department today releases new law enforcement guidelines against racial profiling. Those new guidelines will also prohibit profiling based on religion, national origin, gender, and sexual orientation. They will not apply to airport and border screenings or intelligence operations. The guidelines have been in the works for the past 5 years. But the timing seems apt with the recent Michael Brown and Eric Garner grand jury rulings. New York officials are now pressing for special prosecutors to investigate police killings of unarmed suspects. Eric Garner died after being placed in a chokehold by a New York City police officer. In Ferguson, Missouri, where Michael Brown was shot by an officer, similar legislation is being proposed. In both of those cases, grand juries did not indict the officers involved. Well, pro-life advocate Alveda King, niece of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., was in Washington today. She talked with our chief White House correspondent, Suzanne LaFranchi. They discussed the importance of prayer, faith, and healing during these racially divisive times.
We're at the Martin Luther King Jr. Monument in Washington, D.C. with Alveda King. Alveda, thank you so much for being here today. What are your thoughts in the wake of Ferguson and the decision by the grand jury in New York while we stand here?
Suzanne, as I watch the people walk by, and we're in the nation's capital, I look at the words right behind us, out of the mountain of despair, a stone of hope. And I can only believe that if my uncle, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., were here today, his brother, my dad, Reverend A.D. King, in the midst of despair, whether it's Ferguson or New York or all of the things that are going on in our nation and around the world, they would remind us to have hope and to pray for peace. And that way we could even actually hope to have justice.
Your uncle famously said that violence never brings peace. As Christians, Catholics, what should we take from what's happening, and how do we apply it to our lives?
Well, you know, some of the leaders of America have been in Ferguson or New York, and you'll hear them say, no justice, no peace. And yet we would say, when I say we, my Uncle Martin, Uncle ML, Daddy, AD, would say no peace, no justice. And so whether or not it's Michael Brown or Eric Garrett or Trayvon Martin, there are many such situations happening around the world. There was a Latino man in Florida recently, and he was sitting in his car, and the police officers thought he appeared to be suspicious, and they began to approach him. And when he reached for something, they said they thought it might be a weapon. And so I believe that what we're going to have to do is to get to the systemic issues. It's not as much about skin color or racism, even though those factors do exist today, but it's a spiritual issue. My uncle M.L., Martin Luther King Jr., talked about moral turpitude, that we're in such a state because we forgot that there's a balm in Gilead. Of course, that's Jesus. And I believe that if my uncle were here today, he would enjoy some of the things that Pope Francis is saying. I really do believe that. And Pope Francis talks about peace and justice as well, life for all human beings. And I believe that that is something that people who do pray and who do have faith in God, that's something that we all have in common. We can be Catholic, we can be Christian, Judeo-Christianity even. And so I believe that through prayer and through faith, we can still find hope in the midst of the despair in Ferguson, New York, or across the land.
All right. Thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Up next, inmates in Louisiana learn skills to help them grow once beyond prison bars. Happy Feast Day on this December the 8th, the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. I'm Brian Patrick. Thanks for joining us. The U.S. and France reach a deal in compensating Holocaust victims. The $60 million agreement was signed in Washington today. It provides funds for thousands of Holocaust survivors or their heirs. Now, this applies to those deported by the French rail company SNCF between 1940 and 1944. A French official says the deal is symbolic, but also achieves concrete goals.
This agreement sought to achieve, and I believe achieves, three main objectives we were jointly looking for: responsibility, memory, and justice.
Payouts will be made possibly in a few months after the French Parliament approves the deal. India is grappling with another highly visible alleged rape case. Protesters gathered at the New Delhi police headquarters after the news broke on Sunday. The alleged rape happened after a woman who ordered an Uber taxi was driven to a secluded spot against her will. Authorities have arrested the driver and banned the Uber taxi service across the capital. Uber says it will work with Indian authorities to keep passengers safe, including new background checks for drivers. Uber already vets its drivers here in the U.S. Typhoon Hagaput passes through the Philippines, leaving 21 people dead but sparing millions of others. In the central city of Tacloban, an entire Catholic parish took shelter together. They are now giving thanks. The sanctuary of the Redemptionist Church became an evacuation center this weekend. 1,500 people, almost the entire parish, crammed together with their belongings, even their pets, riding out the typhoon. Unlike last year's super typhoon, this storm was mostly limited to local flooding, downed trees, and damaged roofs. But the parish priest says the relentless weather challenges the faith of his parishioners.
Encountered so many questions like that. Is it the will of God or the wrath of God? But now, no, they feel that it is just part of nature.
Last year's storm, Haiyan, left more than 7,000 dead or missing. Some Louisiana prison inmates are being licensed in landscaping and horticulture. Catherine Zeltner shares how one program helps them prepare for life after prison.
Bo Blackwell knows a thing or two about second chances. He got one from the most unlikely of places. Drug charges landed him a year in the Louisiana State Penitentiary at Angola, home to the state's most violent criminals and murderers.
It was definitely an eye-opening experience to know that one bad decision could lead you back there for the rest of your life.
Blackwell went into a prison re-entry program for short-timers, or those with longer sentences but good behavior records. Inmates take courses and can acquire state licenses in horticulture, landscaping, even mosquito control. The goal? A better shot at landing a job after release.
It's taught us a lot of things being here. As of going out, we can actually be something that we never thought we could be.
Roughly the size of Manhattan Island, Angola includes one of the largest working prison farms in the nation. Why inmates outside of the program are also put to work.
You got a peace of mind out here.
Isaac Smith, serving a life sentence for second-degree murder, says the farm is freedom.
Being inside the penitentiary like we all know, used to be one of the worst in the nation. It's a blessing.
Angola also turned out to be a blessing for Blackwell and his family.
It saved my son's life. That's what it did.
Blackwell, a father of two, says he's grateful for the opportunity to right his wrongs.
It's really tough to know that some people never get a second chance.
And get his life back on track. Catherine Seltner, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Catherine. Until tomorrow, we encourage you to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, watch again on EWTN's YouTube page. A special thank you tonight for the Franciscan Missionaries of the Eternal Word, Father Mark and Father Patrick, offering Mass for all of us here at EWTN News Nightly for this Feast of the Immaculate Conception. I'm Brian Patrick as we close tonight with moments from today's celebration of the Solemnity of the Immaculate Conception. In Rome, God bless you and thank you for joining us tonight.